What's up, everyone? Josh White here, and you would not believe the week that I had. Unless you're friends with me on Facebook, in which case you probably saw everything. But at any rate, I was personally invited by General Geraghty, the commander of the 96th Test Wing, to join him and his epic team of leaders to the Strategic Off-site, where we spent 2 days together learning all about the mission, how we're looking, where we're going. Where we're going with families, housing, childcare, capabilities, the community. It covers everything, y'all. And what made it really special, also invited two very renowned authors, Dr. Hal Brands and Miss Jennifer Pahlka. Hal Brands is a Henry A. Kissinger Distinguished Professor of Global Affairs at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. His insight on foreign relations and international affairs is impressive, to say the least. And he's the author of Danger Zone, The Coming Conflict with China, in which he co-authored with Michael Beckley. Now, the book is phenomenal, and if you're a military member, if you're a service member, or just someone that wants to get educated on international affairs, this is the book for you. And Dr. Brands brought his expertise on these threats and the future and our capabilities and where we should be going. It was super enlightening, and I got to sit down with Dr. Brands and have a great discussion with him. The other guest speaker and author was Jennifer Pahlka. She's the author of Recoding America and a pioneer in making government work for people in the digital age. She founded Code for America in 2010 and led the organization for 10 years. She's worked as the U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer under President Obama and helped found the U.S. Digital Service. Jennifer Pahlka pretty much was speaking to my soul. A lot of the nonsense, the caught up in the weeds type of mentality that we get, especially in government, she helped sift through all that. The stories in her book are not only very relatable, but also incredibly enlightening with the unique perspective that Jen brings to the table. And to top it all off, General Geraghty invited me to his office, where I sat down with this incredible leader and had a one-on-one discussion with the man himself. What I'm trying to say is we had an epic week, y'all. An epic week. We've been doing this 3 years now, and look how far it's come. And it's all from the love and support and this message that we've been putting out there. So for all my Team Hero Front family listening, thank you so much. This is only the beginning, and let's get after it. All right, y'all, we're going to kick this off with General Geraghty, commander of the 96th Test Wing. He goes to the Hero's Gauntlet. We talk about his Catalyst of Growth Summit speech, his proudest Air Force moment, and the biggest mentor in his life. We also ask who would play him in a movie, which he actually nails that one. You gotta check that out. The topics that we hit on were the strategic offsite, the purpose of it, and what we're trying to achieve here. Takeaways from the authors that were our guest speakers, Hal Brands and Jennifer Pahlka. And then lastly, we wrap it up with a message to the airmen straight from General Geraghty himself. So we're going to kick it off with him. Around the 26-minute mark, we'll roll into Jennifer Pahlka. And then around the 37-minute mark, we're going to wrap it up with Dr. Hal Brands. Thank you so much for joining us today. You are just such a humble, insightful leader who really engages with the airmen. There's been times where I've never seen the general, maybe in passing. But you are so involved. You seem to be everywhere at once. Like there's like 10 of you on this base. And so I wanted to...
kind of you to say, Josh.
Yes, sir.
I'll tell you how it feels from my side. I feel like I wish I could be more places. I feel like I'm not where everybody needs me to be. I'm not making enough FaceTime,
Right.
That's what it feels like.
I think there's no way to not feel like that sometimes. And we're going to put you through the Hero's Gauntlet. We're going to do the random questions. You ready for that?
Hit me.
Okay. First question. Who would play you in a movie?
My 14-year-old daughter asks me that all the time. And
Oh, really?
I never have a good answer.
Never?
Never satisfactory to her. So I let her answer it. I have heard before, when I was growing up anyway, the actor Sean Penn.
Yes.
Yeah. When I used to have a little more hair than I have now, the people cutting my hair would say I look like Sean Penn. And my nickname in college was Spicoli, after Jeff
No
Spicoli
way.
from Fast Times.
That was like one of his first roles, right? That is a great actor to play you. Although you're much younger, so they'd have to do some CGI there. But the biggest mentor in your life and what you still carry, like what attributes you carry with you today with your leadership philosophy that this mentor imparted on you?
I don't know if I'm going to be able to pick just one, Josh, but so many great leaders, and I know the reason I am able to serve in this capacity I'm able to serve is because of all of those great leaders, from my mom and dad to commanders that I've had, from squadron commanders. I mean, if you look through my record and you saw who my squadron commanders were and things like that, people at that level, they were some of the most amazing leaders that the Air Force has had, and so obviously they had a big impact on me. But I also learn a lot from the leaders who aren't so great. I do. Just always paying attention to every leader and every interaction they have with everybody, not just with me, but the way they appear to make other people feel, the way they make me feel. So I guess I'd have to boil it down to recognizing the importance of how you make people feel as a leader. And people attribute this quote to Maya Angelou all the time, that people aren't going to remember what you say, people aren't going to remember what you do, but they're always going to remember how you make them feel. And you can empower people, make them feel empowered, make them feel like they have mastery over their craft with your words, with your actions. They won't remember what you said or what you did, but they'll remember how you felt. And sometimes the right thing to do too is to make people feel a little bit uncomfortable if they're not given their full potential, you know? People actually appreciate that, I think. People appreciate you just being honest.
That's it right there, that part. So at the Catalyst of Growth Summit, we were super blessed and honored to have had you as the first speaker, which you blew us away with your transparency and your vulnerability. But the story was essentially your brother almost taking his own life and the impact that had on you and your family. And so my question to you is, what in your heart told you that you needed to share that story with us?
Well, it seemed like the right venue, that Catalyst for Growth, and seeing who the follow-on speakers were going to be and the things that we were going through right then. Last year at this time, for not just the 96 Test Wing, but for all of Team Eglin, we were struggling with suicides. And I had tried to tell that story a couple of times, or thought about it, talked with the team here. Before my commander's call, I had talked with Chief Temple, my command chief at the time, and he knew that because we share a lot, and so I'd bounce it off of him. Hey, is this the right time, you think, to just tell that story briefly? That he would encourage me, the team would encourage me, but I just didn't have the strength a lot of times. So that was finally the moment where it was the right venue, it was the right audience, it was the right time for the organization just to come out with that story.
I'm super proud of you for doing that. I have those stories too that you want to share, but you can't quite find the words to.
Yeah.
But I've learned that when you do find those words, there's something healing about that process. Thank you for sharing that. I remember I was watching you from Israel.
No kidding.
I was deployed to Israel.
Wow.
Doing all the marketing from there.
No kidding.
I'm telling you, it was wild.
You were part of that Catalyst for Growth team?
Yes, sir. Yeah. All the social media, all of that was me.
Perfect.
From afar.
That was an excellent event. I was proud of the team, and you seem like a good fit for that team with your interests.
For you to kick it off that way, you set the tone for the whole day. Like, you gave people permission to be themselves, and I just wanted to personally thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you.
I always ask this to every airman, and that is, what is your proudest Air Force moment?
Yeah. I know you ask that to all airmen, and I prepared for that one.
Oh.
I did.
I like that.
But I didn't need to prepare for long. I was just listening. I re-listened to one of my favorite episodes that you did, and it was with Ashley Glass, and she's a real humble airman leader too. I caught that this is a question that you always ask. And it came to me pretty quick. One of my proudest Air Force moments was as a squadron commander. So pretty new to the leadership at that level. You know, I was a brand new squadron commander, and squadron commander is the most important job in the Air Force. It's the toughest job in the Air Force. It's where you have to know your people, every single one of your people, really well. You got to know them. You got to know their families. You've got to set the example for integrity, service, excellence. And so I was doing my best to set the right tone from the get-go. And within a couple of weeks after my first commander's call, I had spoken a lot about the core values, integrity, service, excellence, and how important that is to me and what it means. And a young lady, an airman, came up to me privately and said, I got to talk to you. I got to set up a time in your office. I need to get some integrity back in my life.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know what that meant, but I said, hey, I'm happy to talk to you anytime. Let's talk. She had gotten the courage to come tell me that she had a drug and alcohol problem.
Wow.
Yeah. And she wanted help.
Holy cow, that's heavy.
Yeah. But I was so proud to just know that if you set the right tone as a leader, we care about you, we care about our people beyond just, hey, show up on time, get your job done, and then get out of here. Like, we care about your whole self, your whole life. And if there's something you need help with to fix, that's what leaders are there for, to help you step along that journey. So she disclosed that to me, and of course, as a commander, there are responsibilities that I have to the institution. But I reassured her that my number one thing is I cared about her. We're going to help her get better. She wouldn't be able to continue to perform air traffic control duties, obviously. Things that she knew were going to be consequences of disclosing. But we got her into the recovery program, ADAPT, got her in residence down there so she could get off the drugs and alcohol and just start to rebuild her life. Just being asked for help like that and then seeing her grow from there, like she had reached the bottom. And she still gets in touch every now and then.
Wow.
Yeah.
You probably saved her life.
Maybe.
I mean, that being a good leader, and especially in that position, there's no way to measure a life saved, right? Because it didn't happen. Like no tragic event happened. But I have complete faith that when you do lead with heart like that, and you make them comfortable enough to approach you with something like that, I absolutely believe that does save lives. Yeah. Your call sign is Jive. Is there a story behind that?
Of course there is. Of course there is.
That you're able to share.
Yeah, it's not that bad, thankfully. I mean, as you probably know, fighter pilots get call signs it's usually to kind of make fun of something about them. But even the ones that sound cool are usually not.
They're not cool.
They're usually ribbing you.
They're worse.
Yeah. But Jive just came from. So as a new fighter pilot, the senior fighter pilots are always paying attention to what you're screwing up, and is that gonna build into a call sign? The goofiest thing that they noticed, I was the snacko in charge of stocking the snack bar. We go through these aircrew meetings on Friday afternoons, and then we usually gather in the Heritage Room and celebrate, and that's where a lot of learning happens too. It's in the Heritage Room when people let their guard down, people start to give each other really candid feedback.
Right.
So I had to give the last announcement of the day before we could all retreat to the Heritage Room. They said, all right, Snacko. And of course, everyone's like, I don't want to hear from this guy. Let's be done. So I said, hey, in the interest of being faster and funnier, I could do this in English or I could do this in Jive. And so they thought, that's kind of interesting. Do it in Jive. And so I just parroted a line from the movie Airplane. That was it. I parroted a line from that. It made no sense. Didn't communicate anything. But maybe it made the guys and gals feel like, hey, he's just one of us, and he knows we all just want to get out of here and go have some camaraderie together. So let's go.
No, actually, that's a great way to get that name. So yes, I think you lucked out compared to some of the other stories that I've heard, some of which they wouldn't even tell me the full story.
Sure.
So I love that. That's a great call sign. All right, we're going to hit our topics now. The first one being the off-site, the second one being the authors and the takeaways, and the third one being the message to airmen that you typically put out and your philosophy behind it. So on the off-site, the strategic off-site, we just held it. It was a huge success. It was absolutely epic. I loved every minute of it. But for our airmen that could not be there, that aren't sure even what it is, I was hoping you could kind of, in layman's terms for us, put in like the purpose of the strategic off-site and then how that factors into going into 2024.
Perfect, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So what I like to do once a year towards the end of the year is get the whole leadership team away from the daily grind, the usual routine, where they can step away from the fray, above the fray, and look strategically at what we do together in the test wing and for Team Eglin, and think through very carefully. We know our team is going to be working hard next year. Let's make sure that they're working smart, that we have our team focused on the right problems, and that we're setting the context for success for the team, doing the best we can to peel away the distractions and the things that give them headaches as best we can. So we gather, take a couple of days, we don't wear the uniform, we go somewhere else that's not the office, and we sit down and think through national defense strategy, threats, big picture type of things, so that we can refine the strategy. Now, a year ago, we sat down in a smaller group so that we could really write the strategy that we would execute during my time in command. This year, we invited a larger group, even community members, spouses, so that they could get more insight into that process itself. Before the next day, we skinnied it down a little bit and started refining the actual strategy. So that's the idea. That's where it comes from.
You had some line of efforts here. Deliver 2030 integrated test, strengthen our team, transform the wing for a digital future, and build a collaborative Eglin. And I got to read through that. I saw all the POCs assigned, like how it's broken down, how it interacts with the community. But I did not know it was that specific and thorough until I got to read it and see it personally. And it was quite the experience. It definitely gives you a sense of purpose after you see that whole big picture. Going into 2024, what type of vision do you have?
Yeah, so the main thing that we needed to focus on heading into 24, in my mind, was the sense of urgency on the pacing threat, our near-peer competitor, the People's Republic of China, being ready. Secretary Kendall talks all the time about optimizing for great power competition and getting that on the top of mind for not just our airmen, but that's why I invited the community in. That's why I invited the key spouses in, because we serve not just as individuals, we serve as family units too. And our families bear a big burden for our service. So making sure everybody understands the nature of the threat, the reason we're here, the reason we put out the uniform, the reason those of us who serve in uniform have made an oath that we'll give our lives in defense of the freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution and the institutions that we protect. So to get that at top of mind was key. That's why I invited Hal Brands, too, the author of Danger Zone, an expert in that field, to give everybody that firsthand account, that sense of urgency. And then the other big picture thing I wanted, not just our team, but our community leaders and our families to marinate in, is that sometimes we get in our own way. And I think Jen Pahlka, I loved many of the quotes that she had for us. One of my favorite is, when you're stuck in traffic, recognize you're not stuck in traffic. You are traffic.
I love that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as she said that, I was like, oh my goodness. Light bulbs went off across, throughout the whole room. Yes, Hal Brands, I thought, the sense of urgency was definitely there. He was just so educated and insightful. And Jennifer Pahlka, I just love her whole philosophy, just on how she views inefficiencies and doing what makes sense. Stop getting caught up in all the weeds. Mm-hmm. We're going to go to our third topic here. Typically, I always hear you say these three things, which I love: informed, connected, and empowered. And, those are very specific, and there's something that's near and dear to you. And I was wondering, where that comes from. What's the heart behind informed, connected, and empowered?
Yeah, well, that's something I brewed up, probably over my whole career, really. Just constantly refining my leadership philosophy. What are the key things that really matter? And I had the opportunity as a squadron commander to try out different things, as a group commander to try out different things, as a wing commander previous to here. What are the things that really resonate with the team? What are the things that span the entire, like everybody can see themselves in those 3 words, no matter what their part of the mission is. And that was important to me as I was thinking through what my touchstones were going to be as the commander of the 96th Test Wing. So these are just things that I think about when I'm out for a jog or a bike ride. Like, what are they going to be? What are the things that I want people to think of when they think of my time in command? And if we keep each other informed, we're going to find out what the right problems are to work the hardest on. If we stay connected, we're going to help each other. Everyone's got each other's back. I went to the Airman Leadership School graduation yesterday, which was brilliant. Master Sergeant Ken Jamie and her team do such a great job. The young lady who stood up to give the invocation, Staff Sergeant Katerina Nelipovich, but she gave the invocation. Such great words. I was sitting next to Colonel Kozlov, who was going to wrap it up at the end, and after she did her invocation, he leaned over and he said, I don't even need to give my speech anymore. That's how good her invocation was.
That's amazing.
And she just said simple things like, let's carry forth the lessons of leadership, integrity, and excellence. May our actions speak louder than our words. May our dedication to service inspire those who follow in our footsteps. So the core values, those are near and dear to my heart too. I think these things resonate with people, these three simple words that you can think of no matter what your job is, no matter, even if you're not on duty. Informed, connected to each other. And that young lady ended up winning the Levito Award yesterday. Gave a great talk about how we have each other's back. We're connected like that. But it's also true at the 96th Test Wing and Team Eglin that we need to connect our technology too as a warfighting imperative. So some of these have double meanings, not just that we in the leadership team are going to keep everybody in the field informed, but we need them to keep us informed so that we know what their problems are. And then empowered is huge.
It is.
To empower as many people as we can at the right level to get everything done. So people aren't just sitting there stuck in traffic. They recognize we are traffic. We are all traffic. What can we solve right now? If we can't solve it right now, if we can't get out of our car and get on a bicycle and start moving, if there's something you can do, get out there and make it happen.
I think empowerment is huge, especially now. We have a smaller force. We need to identify our individual talents and uniqueness and what we bring to the table. The most growth, reflecting on my career that I've ever had, was when I had a boss who believed in me and empowered me to force me to get creative. And those are lessons that just get ingrained in you, that you carry on forever. And if you don't give someone that opportunity, then you're doing them a disservice.
And this is the strength of our force too, Josh. This is our competitive advantage over the PRC, over the People's Republic of China. And they know it. They don't have an NCO Corps like we have. They don't have one at all. I think they're just starting to build one, and I think you can read about this even in their open press documents. They know they're behind because they don't have empowered people. Everything has to come from the top down. At yesterday's ALS graduation, too, the main speaker, Chief Master Sergeant Michael Cole Paisley, he said that our advantage over the PRC is our NCO Corps, empowering them, lifting them up, making sure we get obstacles out of their way, and let them lead the way.
We're coming to an end here, sir. I thought if you wanted to take this moment to say anything to the airmen or the team, I wanted to give you that opportunity as well.
Well, thanks, Josh. Thanks for the opportunity. I don't get to say thank you to everybody as often as I wish I could. That's what's in my heart. That's what this team deserves, is a thank you for your service. There are so few people who decide to give a portion, even a portion of their lives, even a couple of years of their lives to national defense, service to their country, service to something bigger than themselves. And we don't do this for the pay. We don't do this for the pay, especially if you're staying past 20 years. Nobody's doing this for the money. They're doing it because they have a dedication to the values that are enshrined in the Constitution, that we the people matter, that individual humans have dignity, that there are human rights that ought to be in place all around the world, and the Western powers after World War II really set up that whole world order to make that possible. That's at conflict right now. That's exactly what's in conflict with the People's Republic of China. They've got a whole different worldview about how humanity should run, and we fight for freedom and the dignity of every single human being. So a thank you to everybody who is contributing to that mission, including their families, including our community. We have an incredibly supportive community here at Eglin Air Force Base. All of our civic leaders. It is just remarkable and beautiful, and I am really grateful to have the opportunity to lead this team at this time with such a tremendous group of colleagues and leaders to get this done with.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And, I just want to end by just telling you, General, that I don't think I've met anyone like you before. And I say that with the utmost respect and love. The way you make people feel are certainly a gem in our lives, and I just want to thank you for all the work you have done, and your wife, who's a huge part of this community too. I wanted to just thank you all for helping us understand the mission and being there for us whenever we need something or need you. So I just wanted to thank you, sir, for taking the time to talk with us, and thank you for leading this mission.
Thank you, Josh, and thanks for the shout out to Nora too. She is
absolutely
the better half of this leadership team.
She's incredible. She's awesome.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. We are wrapping it up. This was the hero's journey of General Geraghty. All right, y'all. We're going to roll right into Miss Jennifer Pahlka, the author of Recoding America, Why the Government is Failing in the Digital Age and How We Can Do Better. So we start on her thoughts on the Eglin mission and its leaders. We roll into the personal experience that reinforced her belief in the significance of empowering civil servants in the policymaking process. We also talk about if you could implement one radical change in government anywhere in the world, what would that be and what would the impact look like? And then we wrap it up with how can the principles discussed in your book be applied to even the lowest ranking individuals on the base? How can they make positive change based on the lessons in her book? All right, y'all, let's get after it. All right, so Jennifer Pahlka, and I got your book right here. You just signed it for me. Recoding America, Why Government is Failing in the Digital Age and How We Can Do Better. And a lot of what you talked about today was stories that you hit on in that book. But the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what's your thoughts on the Eglin mission and its leaders, and what was your goal by speaking with us today?
I just live to support people who are working for the public good on important things and are facing a lot of challenges in getting done what they know needs to get done. So there is no place more critical than this base. I think our national security is really important. I think we need to be better prepared. And I know from my time hanging out with folks in the military, I was on the Defense Innovation Board for 4 years, that all the folks here are fighting like hell to get stuff done. And if I can help by just sharing some stories and some tactics, I want to do that. So it's a great honor.
Absolutely. And we loved having you. Can you share a personal experience or realization that reinforced your belief in the significance of empowering civil servants in the policymaking process?
My first job out of college, I worked in a child welfare agency. And, then later on I got into tech and ended up doing tech and government. And I thought back to that time I was at the child welfare agency, seeing those kids come in. I just sat at the front desk, so I'd see them come in, they'd go for a visit with their biological parents, they'd come out, there was a group home, but you see these faces and then you file the paperwork around them. So you know what's going on with them from the paperwork and you see their faces. And when I started to understand how we do technology and systems and operations in government, and I thought, we need to do our best here. This is where we should be offering the best that our society has to offer, because I could see those faces of those kids. And, I look around at the states that are trying to modernize their child welfare systems, and it's not going very well anywhere. So I think that these kinds of systems are so critical. They're much more important than even, it's great that we can order a car and it shows up and drops us off. I love that. And it feels important to me now. But is that more important than the technology to take care of kids who are in our care, to defend our nation, to get housing built, to electrify our country? No. I think we need to be putting these resources where they're needed most.
Wow. So you got to see basically, the people that all this affects, that oftentimes the people who are making those decisions don't see, right? So that's pretty powerful.
And I think, the more we can show the people in charge the faces of those people, the better. There's a story in the book about being at the Veterans Affairs Department, been trying to figure out how to fix this veterans healthcare application. Problem was that it was set up to open in a very specific combination of Internet Explorer and Adobe Reader. And if you didn't have that combination, it wouldn't open. Well, almost no computers outside the VA had that combination, but that's the exact combination that all the computers inside the building were set up in. And so trying to tell them that nobody outside the building could use it didn't make sense, didn't get us anywhere, because they kept saying all of the requirements have been met. There's nothing technically wrong here. Paperwork's all signed off on. I can't get funding for a project that seems to not be needed. And it was bringing the face of one of these homeless veterans, Dominic, who we recorded trying to get on it, talking about how many times he's tried in the past, talking about how much he needed health care, just talking about his life. Really, you saw him as a human being. And my colleague Marina brought that to the Deputy Secretary of the VA at the time, and she showed this recording in a meeting, and that particular moment changed everything. Suddenly he said, we've got to fix this. I don't care what they say in procurement. I don't care that all the requirements are met. We're fixing this. And, all the conversation about paperwork didn't matter then. What mattered was this human's experience. And we got to start putting that at the center of what we do.
I love that story because we lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Like, we get so in the weeds that we're like, no, every box is checked.
Well, this, this wasn't me, by the way. I was working alongside Marina Nitz at the time. It was actually two of her product designers and user researchers. And that's another part of what I'm trying to bring to the table is that's what they're trained to do, these folks. They did that because it's a natural thing for them to do, because that's how they've developed products in the private sector before. And I'm not a big fan of the private sector does things better. I think the public sector does a lot of stuff really well, and we got to care about the public sector's needs. They're not the same. We had people there who had a different kind of training and a capability, and that's what made the difference. We've got to really look at who are we hiring to do what kind of skills are we asking our workforce to have. And certainly, like going out and interviewing some guy who's the Starbucks next to the Five Below in the strip mall, that is not a skill set we hire for now, and it should be.
If you could implement one radical change in how governments operate globally, what would it be, and what impact do you think it would have?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to pick one, but I will start with, I would change how oversight works. I think that public servants, civilian and military, all know 7,000 ways that they can get in trouble and very few ways that they can get celebrated for taking a risk and doing the right thing instead of the compliant thing. They're not always the same. And if we want public servants who make that choice, if we want public servants who say, this is going to get us at the outcome, somebody may disagree with it, and so it might hurt my career in some way, but we want them to make that decision, we have to create the environment in which they feel like they're going to get rewarded. So we have congressional hearings, we have General Accountability Office, we've got IGs, there's tons more in the military, and all those folks, all they do, pretty much, is find things that are wrong. And that creates a lot of risk aversion. So if we spent half of our oversight capabilities elevating people who'd made good decisions, even if it wasn't technically the most compliant, if it wasn't just focused exclusively on checking all the boxes, I think we'd have a different culture.
You're speaking to my soul right now. So I've had two different bosses. I had one that gave me that freedom.
Yeah.
And our program was like #1 in the whole year. We got to go TDY and awards ceremony, all because, we had a boss that believed in us and empowered us for creative control. All right. So how can the principles discussed in your book be applied by your average base level airman in their work centers?
I have stickers now for some of the key concepts in the book, and I want to hand them out. And I think you can pick up one and just, use it in the course of your work. One of them is, let's not build concrete boats, right? So when they're on a project, they have to say, how are we product managing this, not just project managing it? So what's the difference? Project management is the art of getting things done, and it's super important, and we have some of the best project managers in government, in part because we have so much to do. But product management is the art of deciding what to do. What's on that list? What's the key priority? And one of those priorities, as we just talked about, needs to work for the user. We're not just filling all the requirements. It's got to actually work. It's got to add up to something. So that's one thing that I think the average person can do is just, maybe it's not a product that they're working on, but who is empowered to make a decision here so that we can have real priorities and get a thing done that's really going to work instead of just check all the boxes. Let's not build that concrete boat.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And what better person to bring it up than the people doing the day-to-day work? Oftentimes, it's a really simple fix. You just have to take the time to talk to them. In theory, should be easy for us to do, but oftentimes it's overlooked.
And people make the choice to just check the boxes. Well, let's be honest. That's what they're incented to do. You get promoted because of a clean record, and it's sometimes rewarded by the culture. But I do see a culture also of folks who support each other in making those decisions, or different decisions, the riskier decision. You got to feel like your colleagues have your back. So you kind of got to all hold hands and decide to do it together. So, part of it's community and feeling like we're all in this together. Now, one reason that people will back the risk-averse answer is because they don't want, they're trying to manage risk. But it's almost always true that managing risk now creates more risk later. And so if you can sort of reframe that and say, wait a minute, I get that you feel like this is the right thing to do, but if we pull back and look at the whole system, if we choose to do this now, ultimately the warfighter is going to have a problem because we got this late, it was too heavy, whatever it is. You got to pull back and sort of look at it more globally and say, being risk averse right now is actually going to get us worse outcomes. Looking at the big picture and sort of all feeling like pushing risk off to the next guy is not the right answer because we're all in it together.
I just want to thank you so much for, being here, speaking to us, speaking on your amazing book, hanging out with us. I feel fired up, after hearing you. I'm ready to get after it.
That's the idea.
Yeah, I knew I was onto something with just my own experience, but then hearing you say it, I was like, see, I knew it.
Well, I love to hear that. The inscription in my book right at the beginning, before we start, is to public servants everywhere, don't give up. And, whenever anybody says, hey, I'm fired up, I'm not giving up, makes me so, so happy.
All right, y'all, we're going to wrap it up with Dr. Hal Brands, the co-author of Danger Zone, The Coming Conflict with China. Super interesting discussion on what a world run by the CCP would look like and why we should worry. We talk about Xi Jinping's goals, his initiatives. There's 4 of them. We go through those. We talk about TikTok. Psychologically, it has America's attention gripped in its hands. What does that mean for us? And we talk about a lot of the strategies the CCP uses whenever they feel threatened. Given that a lot of pharmaceuticals and products Americans use are made in China, you could see how this might be a serious problem. All that and more with Dr. Hal Brands. Let's get after it. But first, I just want to say thank you so much for coming out here and spending time with Team Eglin. Like, to have your perspective is unreal. You know, I was watching you on YouTube, listening to podcasts, and I was like, holy cow, like, this guy's going to come talk to us?
Well, it's my honor, so thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm with Dr. Hal Brands, who wrote this incredible book, Danger, The Coming Conflict with China. And you co-authored this with another author named Michael Beckley, and you guys did a fantastic job at this book. Thank you for signing it.
Well, it's been a real privilege to come down here and meet General Geraghty and some of the other leaders at the base and just get a sense of what they're trying to do to help the U.S. get ready for some of the challenges that may be coming down the pike, and also seeing the effort they're making to get everybody off base for a couple of days to think in a big picture sense about how they can work more effectively. So I've just been enormously impressed by everything I've seen, and it's been a really interesting trip. In terms of my own background, I'm an academic by trade. I got started studying the history of the Cold War. I did a PhD in history, but I've always had an interest in policy issues, and so I've always gravitated toward studying history for what it can teach us about present challenges, and that's the approach that Mike and I took in the book that you kindly mentioned. It's the approach that I've taken in a lot of my work, and it's one of the reasons why I've always tried to blend being kind of a traditional academic with being somebody who participates in policy debates, whether that's by working briefly in government or writing about issues that are of concern to the larger policy community or whatever the case might be. I think it's really important that folks with an academic bent try to make their work relevant to challenges of public policy.
No, it's amazing. It's kind of like all of the work makes you such a unique person, and this is your way of kind of giving back.
Well, it's always nice to hear that, but to be honest, I even have a more selfish motive for it, which is that I learn a lot by getting out and talking to different groups about the issues that I'm working on, and whether it is the 96 Test Wing or whether it is a group of insurance professionals that are interested in issues of geopolitical risk. When you get out and interact with these communities, you hear the questions, you hear the comments that they raise. You learn things about subjects that you didn't know about before. You come to appreciate different perspectives on different issues. And so all of it helps to inform my thinking about these challenges as well.
So you mentioned 4 goals by Xi Jinping, which was to remain a dictator, to make China whole again, a broader regional sphere, which sounded like to be depended on, and global supremacy, kind of reclaiming what they had a very, very long time ago. So my question is, let's say all that happens. I was hoping you could kind of paint the picture for us on what a world run by China actually looks like and why that should concern us.
I think it looks pretty ugly for the United States. And so if you think about America's strategic tradition, 3 times over the past 105 years, the United States has had to intervene in big conflicts within Eurasia, right? So World War I, World War II, the Cold War, because we concluded that it would be intolerable to our own security, our own prosperity, perhaps even our own freedom, if a hostile power were able to exert control over the world's strategic core. Let's think of it that way. And so just based on that history, the United States would find it very uncomfortable to live in a world where China dominated maritime Asia, for instance. But let me try to make it more concrete than that. And so one reason the U.S. wouldn't like that is because if China became the dominant power in East Asia, it would try to lock other powers out of the region economically. And so it would force countries in the region to cut trade deals that would orient their economies toward Beijing and leave the United States on the sideline. And so the United States would lose access, economically speaking, to one of the most economically dynamic and vibrant regions of the world in a way that would be bad for our own growth and prosperity over time. There's also another way in which I think we can make this more concrete, which is that a world in which an autocratic power, a dictatorial power like China, is dominant is going to be a world that's pretty uncomfortable for the world's democracies. We've already seen that China tries to use its economic influence to stifle criticism, that is, to stifle free speech in other societies. So I'll give you an example of this. In 2020, the government of Australia said, hey, maybe it would be a good idea if we had an inquiry into what caused COVID and what let it loose on the world. The Chinese government didn't like that, and so they imposed a bunch of trade sanctions on China, on Australia rather, made a bunch of demands, which included basically shutting up newspapers and think tanks that had been critical of China, right? So basically trying to reach into the heart of Australian democracy and silence critics of Chinese policy. That sort of thing will only become more pronounced as China becomes more powerful. And so there's this idea that the United States has tried to make the world safe for democracy, not spread democracy everywhere, but create a world in which democracy in the United States can be secure. And I worry that that objective would be at risk in a world where China is dominant.
Which is kind of terrifying, because a lot of our medical equipment, a lot of our meds, how many things have you seen that said made in China? So, for them to kind of, power play with those things and what they're allocating, that's a scary future for us.
The supply chain dependencies are very real, and the scenario that you mention is very troubling. And so if you remember, at the very beginning of COVID, China basically threatened to start withholding PPE, masks, and other things, as well as pharmaceutical precursors from the West, if the U.S. didn't stop criticizing China as the source of the COVID outbreak. That's just a preview of what would happen if China comes to be dominant, if it has dominant nodes in a lot of these critical supply chains, semiconductors, 5G telecommunications, so on and so forth. The Chinese Communist Party will not be at all hesitant to weaponize those positions of advantage for purposes of economic and geopolitical leverage.
I was kind of curious, what do most Americans get wrong about China?
Well, I think the good news here is that Americans in general are becoming far more aware of the threat that China poses. And so there are organizations that do sort of global polling and will ask questions that are meant to determine whether you have a favorable or an unfavorable view of China. And not just in the U.S., but basically in a lot of advanced democracies, countries in Europe and East Asia, for instance, favorability ratings of China have sort of fallen off a cliff over the past half decade. A lot of it has to do with COVID. A lot of it has to do with a bunch of other issues. But Americans are now more likely than not to identify China as their primary geopolitical competitor. I think there's a bipartisan consensus in the U.S. on that. And you're seeing growing political support, perhaps not adequate support, but growing support for measures that would make the U.S. more competitive with China, like the Chips and Science Act, which is basically meant to turbocharge America's semiconductor industry and America's investments in other critical industries to help it win the technological contest with China. And so in a big picture sense, I think Americans are becoming more aware of the challenge that China poses, and that's a good thing. One of the things that I mentioned in my talk is I think it would be helpful if Americans had a greater understanding of the degree to which some of the products they buy may be manufactured with essentially slave labor in Xinjiang, a region of China's west. There are lots of multinationals that have major operations in Xinjiang. The labor practices there are very spotty. The U.S. has laws on the book that are meant to prevent the import of products that are made with forced labor, but enforcement of those laws are spotty as well. And so I think it would be worth a while just to do a little bit of self-education on, where does this thing that I buy from Amazon actually come from, and might it be made with practices that I would not be comfortable with morally.
Right. You kind of opened my eyes to that too, because they're selling stuff at all-time lows now. I mean, they even have a shop on TikTok where you can buy stuff for like pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And to think that came from forced labor,
yeah. And TikTok is another good example because, a lot of the data that is collected by TikTok is, potentially subject to being accessed by intelligence authorities in China. And I think a lot of Americans, when they use TikTok, don't realize that they're using an app that, for instance, its algorithms, often privilege pro-Chinese viewpoints and restrict viewpoints that are deemed to be anti-China, and it's also hoovering up lots of data that could find its way into the wrong hands.
Yeah, TikTok really fascinates me, and as a social media person, it kind of worries me the most because I see how bad they're kicking our butt in the social media sphere. So what else are they kicking our butt in is how that strikes me. But, to have that American attention so fixated, do you think that they've made any significant changes to that, or do you think it's all still in the hands of the CCP whenever they want to look into it?
Well, the problem is not necessarily what TikTok or the CCP is doing right now. The problem is what pressure TikTok and its parent company are subject to simply because they operate from China. They have operations in China. There are laws on the book in China that basically compel any firm that with a presence in China, and certainly a firm that's headquartered in China, to be responsive to intelligence requests from the Chinese intelligence authorities. And so what that means is that, if at some point in the future the CCP goes to TikTok and says, we need access to this data, TikTok is not legally empowered to refuse. And it's not entirely clear that some of the solutions that have been proposed for this problem, like storing the data in the United States, actually provide sort of foolproof workarounds. And so it's really one of those issues where just sort of knowing what we know about the CCP and how it operates, you really can't have a high level of confidence that this data would not be accessed in some way or another.
Do you think it's more data-driven that the CCP is interested in TikTok, or do you think it's more psychological manipulation?
It's hard to say which is more. I mean, it could be a mixture of both. I mean, I think the CCP pays a lot of attention to what they call cognitive warfare, basically winning the informational fight. And so I wouldn't be at all surprised if CCP officials see TikTok as a powerful tool for promoting pro-China narratives. But the leverage that you get from potentially having access to this vast pool of data would also be a powerful incentive, I would think.
But there's a majority of our airmen that are working right now at Eglin Air Force Base that could not be here today. So if you were able to give them a message to kind of get them in the right headspace so that they do get something out of your talk, what would that message be?
I'd maybe say two things. The first is just thank you, because I think that all the folks at Eglin and really all the folks who work for the U.S. military in general are doing extremely important work on a day-to-day basis. Some of it is directly related to the China challenge, but even the part that's not related to the China challenge is related to giving the U.S. the military capabilities that it needs to be effective in a very dangerous world. And so I would just say sort of keep up the good work on that perspective. I mean, the other point I would make is that when I talk about the China challenge and what the U.S. is doing, I don't want to give the impression that the U.S. military or the U.S. government are not doing good things to get ready for this challenge. They are. And I mentioned a number of these in my talk. Whether you look at some of the changes that the U.S. services are making and the way they think about warfighting, thinking about the acquisition of greater stocks of munitions and other capabilities. If you think about some of the coalition management things the U.S. is doing in the Indo-Pacific, a lot of it is very positive, and it's definitely pointed in the right direction. The but part of this, though, is that I'm not sure it's happening with the urgency and with the speed that is required to get ahead of the challenge, whether that's the challenge in the Taiwan Strait or in the China domain more broadly. And so the thing I would sort of emphasize, and I always try to emphasize with audience like this, is we need the good work that you're doing. We need more of it. And we need it not just from folks who are at the pointy end of the spear. We need it from folks in the political arena. We need it from folks in the diplomatic arena. We really need to start thinking about this as an all of government and all of society challenge.
Absolutely. Wow. That was. It's been very amazing having you here, sir.
The privilege is all mine. It's been a lot of fun to come down here and see some of the good things that are going on. And I've learned a lot while I'm here. So I really feel like I've benefited quite a bit.
Awesome. All right, y'all. So Dr. Hal Brands, co-author of Danger Zone, The Coming Conflict with China. Definitely pick up your copy. We heard his talk.
Thanks, Josh.
And safe travels.
Very much.
What an incredible three-part episode. What an opportunity. I just want to thank General Geraghty for just being the leader that he is and how he sees the world and how he thinks. And I really appreciate him. I appreciate how much he cares and the opportunity that he gave me to kind of let me in his world. Not just me, but the thousands of you were also sitting in that chair with me talking to these incredible people. I want to thank his public affairs team, his protocol team. They absolutely made this possible and easy for me. So I really appreciate them. I want to give them a shout out. Also to our two speakers who came in. I got both books autographed. I think I got about 60 autographed books at this point, because authors and podcasters go hand in hand, let me tell you. And lastly, just want to thank Team Hero Front, the friends, the family, the connections, the conversations, the motivation, the amount of love created with just through talking has been life-changing. So thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Take care.